General Manager Chris Getz has laid out his vision for the offseason, but now he faces the real test, proving he can execute on his plan and securing the owner's backing to make it happen.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm Todd Welter. Welcome to Locked On White Sox, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm a lifelong Sox fan. I've been podcasting here for over a year and a half and covering the team well before then. And I've also covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. I'm going to get to the possibility of the White Sox getting a boost if Byron Buxton agrees to waive his no-trade clause and the Twins possibly deal him out of the division this offseason. After I talk about Getz making the call that Grant Taylor will stick in relief and it being the right choice. But first, let's discuss Getz laying out his offseason plan and how he'll have to clear 2 bars, executing it and getting the owner to hopefully fund it correctly. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. So Chris Getz spoke to the media yesterday at the GM meetings in Las Vegas. And the quotes I saw, I give the general manager credit actually for being very candid. He laid out how he is still in discussion with the owner about nailing down the payroll, but did say there will be money to spend in free agency. He also hinted that the team could sign players to multi-year deals. He also discussed what positions the team is going to target. And I basically came away with a couple of takeaways from his overview on how he's foreseeing the offseason going. The first is he better execute correctly on the upgrades that he wants to get. The second is he's got to find a way to get Jerry Reinsdorf to properly fund it. Good luck with that. And the third is if he can do both, then he, in my book, has proven up to this point then that he might be up to the task of actually pulling off this monumental rebuild. So when it comes to getting the execution of a plan, at least he's zeroing in on the areas that I think you and I know probably the White Sox need to upgrade in the lineup. And this is from Chicago Sun-Times beat reporter Kyle Williams. He posted this on X, formerly Twitter. This is at K_Williams Media. I got the tweet up for those watching on YouTube. Getz also said that the areas the Sox are looking to improve this offseason are at the corner outfield spots, bullpen, and finding a left-handed bat to balance out the lineup. Now, don't worry. He also mentioned starting pitching per Chicago Tribune White Sox beat writer Lamond Pope. This is what Lamond Pope wrote. Quote, "We've been able to create decent amount of starting pitching depth," Getz said. "That can change quickly, but to be able to navigate a full season, the amount of starts you need out of your starters and innings, you want to be able to protect some of these young arms. You've got prospects, Hagen Smith and Noah Schultz, who are getting closer, but you don't want to be too reliant and dependent on those innings because you want to bring them up when it's appropriate for them," end quote. However, I still think when, it comes down to get the owner to fund the additions he is seeking, he's got to get the funding to make this a 15 to 20 win improvement because, again, I don't see Jerry committing to a $200, $300 million payroll to take the White Sox from 3 straight 100 losses to suddenly contending for a World Series. And I think that would be, from going from 60 wins to 90 wins, while I would love it, I just don't see that happening, especially how Chris Getz has been talking about internal improvement of the young core. But that internal improvement can only take them so far. You do need veterans to help out in certain areas that he is looking to upgrade on. They do need help in the bullpen. They have some exciting young arms that can even be bullpen arms, but they might need some more innings, even though there's only so many figurative bullets in those guys' arms in the minors. Braden Montgomery probably still needs more at-bats in the minors before he's ready to take over either center field or right field. So I get that he's targeting this, but you've got to hope that Jerry does commit to the funding to get to that 15 to dare to dream 20 win improvement. Because you want to see, phase 2 internal improvement, but you'd also like, again, to see another leap in the win improvement because the leap that they just did, and I talked about on yesterday's episode, everydayers might recall, that they went from, they had a 19 win improvement, but that was just to get back to baseball factory standards. Now they have to show us that they can actually be, somewhat competitive in phase 2, along with the internal improvement. And it does sound like Reinsdorf has not locked Getz into a budget yet. This is what Kyle Williams tweeted out again. I got the tweet up for those watching on YouTube at K_Williams Media. White Sox GM Chris Getz on payroll discussions with ownership. Quote, "It's still fluid. We're going to be able to add some free agents and identify players that we feel like could help this club. We're going to be aggressive in the right places," end quote. Getz also said the organization is open to, quote, multi-year contracts, end quote, and he added the caveat that, quote, "it's got to make sense," end quote. So I would love for the payroll to be around 100 million, as I think that should be sufficient to add the bullpen and rotation upgrades, along with maybe getting a better bridge option in right field. And yes, I know this is the Chicagoland market. I know you're about to jump into the comments and say, well, it's Jerry and blah, 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 blah. Remember, the Guardians won the AL Central with a payroll around 100 million. Now, I'm not going to say that they're competing for the AL Central, but 100 million would be enough, I think, to take that next step in the rebuild. And I would love for that, like maybe multi-year making sense and a left-handed bat. I'd love for it basically being adding Josh Naylor. And I'm still going to die on that hill, being that he's the one multi-year contract free agent guy out there on the market that makes the most sense to me. Left-handed bat has destroyed your organization, but it's not just because he's destroyed your organization. He hits well at right field. And while it sounds like first base is not a priority, they could use a better long-term option. And Naylor's 28. And while I know I've said wins and losses won't matter again next season, having a well-executed offseason that hopefully increases the win total into the high 70s, kind of like, friend of the show, Courtney Finicum. I've seen her on social media from Baseball Isn't Boring, tweeting, hey, well, it'd be great if the White Sox could be like what the Marlins did this past season, win 79 games, show that you're on the upward trajectory. And that can happen if you have a well-executed offseason. And Getz has got to be able to pull that off, because now that you want him to still show that he's up to the task of pulling off this monumental rebuild. Because right now we don't have a lot of data actually on if he's going to be good at this job. We don't. So far, he's done the easy stuff. He's gotten this organization into the modern age. He's modernized the front office. He has executed a great trade with Boston by trading Garrett Crochet. He executed a fairly poor trade for Dylan Cease. So again, it's 50-50 on his assets, but turns out in the long run, he did all right on that Eric Fetty deal that I panned mercifully in 2024, with how Miguel Vargas has at least emerged as a race 4 player. Terrell Perez, he might be another player. And the Cardinals got absolutely nothing out of Fetty and Tommy Pham, although they're going to come in second forever because the Dodgers used Michael Kopech to win the World Series. But he's 2 for 3 on executing on his assets, but he's got to prove that he can execute on phase 2. Now, part of phase 2 working is, the coaching staff developing this young core at the major league level. But the other part is going to fall on him bringing in the right veteran pieces off the free agent market to help this young core start winning more. And trade shouldn't be ruled out either, as Getz alluded to. He might pull off some trades. But the owner's got to help him out by authorizing a payroll that at least pushes it into 100 million. And, for example, again, because he's talking about maybe Sam Atanachi being in the mix for a left-handed bat. I still think Sam probably needs some more at-bats in the minors. But I would like to see that 100 million, because maybe you can go get those relievers that thrive in high leverage situations. So you can actually maybe win some more of those close games. You can get maybe a couple of starting pitchers that not only eat innings, but provide quality starts. And then you can flip those guys at the deadline instead of just falling into it, luckily, with Adrian Hauser. And again, get a decent bridge option in right field until Braden Montgomery is ready. Maybe that, you could still keep Mike Tauchman. I love Mike Tauchman, but maybe he might be better suited to being that 4th outfielder, more in that utility role. And also Getz said that, Benintendi will still play in left and DH. So you got to figure out maybe if you can get rid of him, that'd solve a lot of problems. But this offseason can go a long way in providing some faith that maybe Chris Getz can do this job. Getz did confirm Grant Taylor will be working on the bullpen next season. So let's discuss why I think that's actually the right call. And that's coming up after the break. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. Keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. I'm always telling you about how fun it is to play FanDuel's traditional money lines, the over-unders, and the spreads. But if you want to win some big-time money, or at least double or triple your cash, play FanDuel's props, parlays, or futures. I know Chicago got beat pretty good last night, but maybe you think Chicago's still that hot start that they got off. Maybe they could ride it all the way to the Central Division title. If you think that, well, that's currently at plus 1,900 the last time I checked. So even putting as little as $5 on that, and if it somehow happens, that's going to pay out $95. Maybe you're more realistic and you want to build a parlay of Chicago making the play-in game and having over 40 wins this season like they normally do. Well, that's at plus 231 the last time I checked, so there's a chance at least to double your money right there. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, you can get the audio version of the show on places such as Apple or Spotify. So make sure to follow or subscribe at wherever you get your podcast. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me and maybe some hope. Also, make sure to check out my written content at SouthsideSox.com and on TapSportsNet.com. So Chris Getz revealed that pitcher Grant Taylor will not be a starter next season. And some of you may find that irritating because his stuff has the high ceiling to be a potential ace starter. However, and I know I sound like a broken record, as everydayers might recall, I keep maintaining if his arm is not able to handle a starter's workload, then use that fantastic arsenal of pitches that he has out of the bullpen. Because again, his arm is going to dictate it. And something also hit me when I was looking at, the comments about Chris Getz saying Grant Taylor will be a reliever next season. It kind of makes sense because while we're all dreaming of him potentially being an ace, he still has to prove that he can actually get outs consistently at the big league level because he was inconsistent last season in high leverage situations. So let him clear that bar first before you start seeing if he can handle a workload of getting guys out 6 innings every 5 days. And I like how Getz is envisioning him as a multi-inning reliever too, as I've always believed, and I go back to some episodes for me when I was advocating for Taylor to even just come up with Peyton Pallette. I was talking about it. The best bullpens usually have a multi-inning closer and a traditional closer. And the other reason why I'm fine with Taylor being in the bullpen is the organization still has Tanner McDougal in the system with electric right-handed stuff that can be a starter too. And the other thing I thought about too is, let's say, Shane Smith continues on the trajectory that he has, even if it's just solid, but all-star starter, number 2, number 3 pitcher. And let's say Sean Burke finally figures out his command, which Getz said he's going to be given a chance to compete for a rotation spot along with Jonathan Cannon, which I will probably talk about on another episode at some point. We got plenty of time to fill, folks. But let's say Sean Burke, with his increased velocity and his stuff, at least has I've always believed he's got great potential to be a good number 3 starter, at the very least a solid number 4. So, okay, let's say that those guys are there. And then let's say Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith do become what we hope they can be, ace left-handed pitchers. You might still want to have a spot open then in the rotation to acquire that truly legit ace, like say what the Cubs did with John Lester. So having Taylor in a bullpen role kind of provides that flexibility and might also mean having McDougal in the bullpen or Burke in the bullpen if he's inconsistent, and then McDougal is better in the rotation. Either way, give yourself some flexibility. And the one thing that the Orioles rebuild showed, and kind of followed the same path that the White Sox rebuild, obviously from last decade, showed, you could only rely on your homegrown talent too much. You still do have to add some established star talent outside, because again, some guys just turn out to be, hitting their floor. Some guys get injured. Some guys only, they become solid players, somewhere between all-star, and again, just 1.5 replacement level player. Maybe they're in that 2 to 3, but again, it might not be enough to put you over the hump, that type of stuff. So sometimes you go and add established star talent. Baltimore did that with Corbin Burns, but as a rental. I would like to see the White Sox possibly add an elite starter to complete the rebuild long term, like how the Cubs did with John Lester. And also, think about this too, not having a second elite arm or kind of waiting, seeing could Dane Dunning get there. We got some other guys coming up in the system. Could Dylan Cease get there in 2020 is also, again, what hurt the White Sox in that playoff round against the Athletics. They just didn't really have that second elite arm. They thought they did by bargain bin shopping with Dallas Keuchel, but Dallas Keuchel was nowhere near his Cy Young days anymore. They just had Lucas Giolito. So, that's why you want to try to get some elite arms. And sometimes you got to go out and acquire them through trades or free agency. But getting back to Taylor, here's what Getz said per the Chicago Tribune's Lamont Pope. Quote, "We don't anticipate him taking starts next year," Getz said. "Obviously, we used him in opener roles. I think it's important for him to throw multiple innings, and that goes to many of our arms in the bullpen," end quote. Taylor went 2-4 with a 4.91 ERA, 54 strikeouts and 6 saves, and 36 2/3 innings in 2025. He made 36 appearances, including 2 starts as an opener. Quote, "It's more focused on the arsenal and the ability to have deeper outings rather than him grabbing starts next year," end quote, Getz said. So, yeah, you're looking at him, using the arsenal that he has and maybe trying to cover 6 outs 2 or 3 days a week rather than him trying to cover 6 innings worth of outs, once every 5 days, which is sometimes just once a week, depending on how the calendar, matches up, that type of stuff. Sometimes you're pitching on Sunday and, Friday. Sometimes if your start falls on, Tuesday, you're not pitching again until if you have an off day, all that type of stuff. So it's kind of, you're just trying to get him used as much as you can. And remember, Taylor did have a 1.42 FIP. So a lot of those runs he gave up was mostly, and if you looked at the eye test, it was on, hitters getting those seeing eye singles. Basically, they were able to get the bat on that 100-mile-per-hour fastball and, by just kind of having a defensive swing, it found the open spot in the outfield because he had a 34.4% K percentage. And the bullpen needs strikeouts too. But he has to cut down on giving up runs in high leverage. He yielded 11 earned runs in those situations. And again, he only threw 36 innings total. And opponents had a 289 average with runners in scoring position on him. So those obviously have to come down. So before you dream of him being a great starter, I think there's enough data to show he still has to clear being able to consistently get big outs in the majors first. But thankfully, there's some evidence that could happen based on the stuff that he showed in September and October. 0.88 whip with a 0.14 FIP per Fangraphs. And again, I honestly dream of him being like Mason Miller. And I know there was a lot of comps to him being like Mason Miller. That shutdown, high leverage reliever. That would be amazing to have on the South Side. Imagine a 1.30 opponent's average with runners in scoring position. So that was Miller's. So imagine deploying that late in games, say, Brandon Eisert, who's still, in a decent low leverage lefty, say he put some guys on in the 7th with a 2-run lead. You got Taylor then, hopefully, if he's like Miller, just shutting the door. And think about this too. Miller gave up just 6 earned runs through an entire season in high leverage situations. And the key for the bullpen to work under Will Venable's strategy is you got to have more arms like Taylor, power arms, say about 6 of them that hopefully can execute in high leverage situations. Well, Byron Buxton reportedly is softening his stance on staying with the Twins, and let's discuss how that would be a huge boost for the White Sox. And that's coming up after the break. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or wherever they get their podcasts, as this show's available on all major podcast platforms. So Byron Buxton has always battled injuries, but he always seems healthy enough to play the White Sox. I mean, I feel like he just miraculously recovers in time to play a 3-game series against the White Sox, and then the next game he ends up injured and missing time. Like, that's why sometimes I believe it's a myth that Byron Buxton is injury prone, because he always seems to be playing against your Chicago White Sox, and he destroys White Sox pitching. But those days, at least playing the White Sox 13 times a season, might be coming to an end. The Athletic's Dan Hayes is reporting Buxton is changing his stance from not wanting to waive his no-trade clause to possibly doing it this offseason to join a contender. Now, I say, go win now, Byron. Get the heck out of the division. Go with you. I hope you find happiness in New York. Demand that trade. Do it. Because I'll admit, selfishly, I'm all for a weakened Twins, regardless of talent, but I really don't want to see Buxton continue to kill the White Sox. Although this is per Dan Hayes, and the way I read his article too, it's just all speculation. And Hayes is very good at speculating. He's a champion of speculating. You know, this is the guy that once threw out, and he sounded very serious on foul territory. I remember I wrote about it when I was writing for Southside Showdown. You know, that he was saying that the Twins offered Luke Keeschel for Eric Fetty, but then only later be like, oh, that was never a possibility. That was like somebody else threw it out there when he was on the Future Sox. Oh, Luke Keeschel was never out. You were the one that said it, Dan. You were the one that suggested it, not some other outside source. So I don't trust the former White Sox beat reporter. I just don't. Some things he's gotten right, but, you know, I wouldn't get my hopes up. But again, hey, I would be all for Buxton leaving the division. And here is what Hayes writes. But a major league source indicated Tuesday that Buxton, who turns 32 next month, wants to play for a winner and may reconsider his stance for certain clubs if the Twins continue breaking up their roster, potentially by trading starting pitchers Joe Ryan and Pablo Lopez. The two-time All-Star center fielder has 3 years and $45 million remaining on his current deal, one which grants him full no-trade protection through next season and the ability to block trades to 5 clubs in 2027 and 2028. Even though the team's payroll and general direction remains unclear, as Twins are set to add 2 limited partnerships to their ownership group, Falvey said Tuesday he doesn't want to further tear apart the club's roster. While acknowledging he's actively listening to all teams' trade concepts to determine the best direction for his club, the Twins president wants to build around a roster featuring Buxton and fellow All-Stars Ryan and Lopez as if he can. Quote, I remain personally committed to figuring out what are the ways we can add to this group and make it better, Falvey said from the general manager's meeting. That is my goal. It was my stated goal before and remains my stated goal until I'm told otherwise. My focus for now is figuring out ways we can add to the group, end quote. And I'm not sure, you know, again, just reading that, it just doesn't sound like a deal would happen in the offseason. But let's say the Twins continue to struggle and they're out of the race by the trade deadline. Maybe they do then trade Buxton at that point. Or again, maybe they're going to trade him next offseason when they have much more flexibility, because then you only have to trade him, you know, you can trade him to 24 other teams without him having a say in it. But man, I would love to see Buxton, say, play the White Sox 3 games a year on a National League contender, because he just kills Sox pitching. A career 939 OPS, a career 134 OPS plus against the White Sox, 23 home runs against the White Sox. And this is why I've always believed his injury riddleness is just a myth. Yes, I know it's fact, but he's never injured a lot against the White Sox because he's played 99 games against the White Sox. And if I read Baseball Reference correctly, I think that's the most games he's played against an opponent. He just always seems to be in the lineup against the White Sox and always just seems to be a thorn in the team's side. And he hits well at right field, 900 OPS, although he just had a modest 852 OPS against the White Sox this past season and just 2 home runs. But he must be slipping. You know, did play, though, in 12 of the 13 possible games against the White Sox. And I do have to wonder, and I'm going to talk about this in more detail probably on tomorrow's show or Monday, because MLB's 670 The Scores MLB insider Bruce Levine did tweet out that the White Sox are still taking calls on Luis Robert Jr. And, you know, if they're still taking calls on him, though, but Buxton's available, even though he's in, you know, both are injury prone, but Buxton is definitely worth the $45 million when he's healthy. Where Luis Robert Jr. the $20 million, again, it's hard to make that case. I wonder how that's going to impact also Luis Robert Jr.'s market. And I wonder how it's also going to impact Luis Robert Jr.'s trade market at the trade deadline. Because again, if Buxton says, yeah, I want out, I'm done. I want to go compete for championships. And we're not going to be doing it right now by the time the contract runs out. Because again, my expectation is, I think with the farm system that the Twins do have, they have one of the best, prospect pools. They can turn things around relatively quickly. So, and plus, if they do get the trades right, if they do trade Ryan and Lopez, and I think they should, and it's not selfish. I think if you're the Twins, you went as far as you could go. You got to scrap it all over again and try again. And I could see both the White Sox and the Twins really competing for the Central by 2029. Because again, the Tigers, you're talking about Tariq Skubal potentially being out of the division after this year. I don't know if he'll sign, because it sounds like, the Tigers ownership is no longer like it was when, the elder Ilyich was alive and owning the team. He would have spent the money to sign Tariq Skubal. It sounds like, the kids who took over are much more cost conscious, which I don't get, because again, Tariq Skubal is what makes you elite. He gives you a chance to win a couple of playoff games. And then if you did add a few more arms and maybe, maybe one more star bat, you could be competing for the World Series, but that could be on its way out. And the Guardians, I mean, I don't want to write them off ever, because they do seem to always every year put together a team that just pitches well, but still it's just at some point, how long is that going to sustain? And as of right now, it's sustaining. So we'll see, but I could see both the White Sox and the Twins really battling it out at the end of this decade and into the next decade. So that's why it's like, just scrap the whole thing. You've got three good assets to get probably some, timeline accelerating rebuild talent back. And if you hit on it right, because if you don't have the mandate to turn things around correctly, I mean, because think about it, the Twins almost have the same type of system, same type of pitching assets as the White Sox had with Cease and Crochet. And if you could actually execute like you did on the Crochet trade, you got a chance to turn things around quickly. But I'm interested to see how Buxton being on the trade market, if he is, because again, I don't know if he's going to, how it sounds like, I'm not going to hold my breath that a trade is going to happen in the offseason, but if it happens at the deadline, how does that impact Luis Robert Jr.? On one end, it's going to take away a potential contender, but also you just got to see, are both healthy? And again, if you can get that Luis Robert Jr. that was raking for 3 weeks before he had the hamstring injury, then he might be the preferred target just because he's a little bit younger. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Game Night. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or listen to your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow with Getz hinting that he may trade from his catching depth someday. Possibly that the White Sox are zeroing in on Ryan O'Hearn, and the Kyle Tucker discussion that I just keep pushing off. I might actually push that off to Monday because I do want to make sure I still get to the weekly fan poll Friday segment. You can leave comments about today's episode on the episode page on YouTube via email, lockdownwhitesox@gmail.com. Again, if you want an electronic pen pal, feel free to email me. As long as it doesn't get weird between the both of us and it's respectful, I will gladly correspond with you. I may not get back to you right away, but again, you can always email me, lockdownwhitesox@gmail.com. You can also leave comments about today's episode on X, formerly Twitter, @LockedOnSox or @ToddJDub. Also, make sure to like today's episode on YouTube. Leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel @Locked On White Sox or wherever you get your audio-only podcast. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.